In a deserted, swampy patch of woodland in New Britain, Connecticut in 2007, the scattered remains of several women were discovered.
I have never had a case where I had 7 possible victims at one crime scene.
For 10 long years, detectives worked to discover who the victims were and who'd killed them.
After the bones were found, I think it was clear that there was a serial killer.
The investigation zoned in on a battered blue van belonging to local gardener William Devin Howell.
And they just started to pick that van apart, fiber by fiber, droplet by droplet.
It is a positive gold mine, a treasure trove of DNA, of all manner of clues.
When the true nature of Howell's crimes were revealed, they were breathtaking in their brutality.
Physical violence, strangulation, probably some of the most violent behavior that I've ever handled as a lawyer.
14 years after the first innocent victim was snatched from the street, William Devin Howell was finally confirmed as one of the world's most evil killers. In 2017, a case that had gripped and horrified a quiet corner of New England concluded with one of Connecticut's most prolific serial killers, 47-year-old William Devin Howell, being locked away for life. But when the story began 14 years earlier, it had gone largely unnoticed.
The media hadn't really covered it very much. No one had really put together that we had all these missing women.
If she was a drug taker with addictions, if she was a sex worker, it's not unusual for them to go missing and not be reported for quite a long time.
When stories of the missing women's fate were finally told, it exposed a dark underbelly that many in this leafy part of Connecticut did not know existed.
Central Connecticut was more of a manufacturing area back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And over time, drugs has infiltrated those areas. And with drugs is prostitution.
But above all, the story showed the world that truly monstrous people are sometimes able to hide in plain sight.
Bill Howell was one of those individuals that was convicted of committing horrific acts of violence. And yet, he's a likable man that you think about and you say, how could he have done this?
This killer's story begins on the 11th of February, 1970.
He grew up in Newport News, Virginia, which is a population of about 200,000 people.
His mother was 40 and his father was 45 when Howell came along.
William Devin Howell, known as Bill, was the youngest of 4 children. Despite a stable childhood, in his late teens, Howell began to take the wrong path.
He went to school, he dropped out of school.
Towards the end of his adolescence, Bill Howell drifted into drugs and he then got drawn into petty crime.
He had some motor vehicle violations that ultimately caused his license to be suspended, and it became a vicious cycle. He continued driving, kept getting arrested, and it resulted in jail time.
By his mid-20s, Howell had collected convictions for drink driving, forgery, reckless driving, and public drunkenness. In 2001, aged 31 years old, he left Virginia.
He met a woman and she was from Connecticut, and he ended up coming to Connecticut.
Moving in with his girlfriend Dorothy in New Britain, William Howell took on a veneer of respectability.
Howell appeared to be quite settled. He had a relationship, a girlfriend. He had a job.
He had this landscaping business that he seemed to be doing okay with.
He cut people's lawns. It was not the kind of lawn mowing service that you see landscapers in affluent communities, just a small 22-inch lawnmower. And it was in the more urban areas of older people that stayed in those communities. They hired him. And they said he was very nice, reliable. He'd come on a weekly basis.
He had a dark blue 1985 Ford Econoline van. It was pretty smashed up. It had plywood over some of the windows. He had on the side quality lawn work, called Devin, and his cell phone.
But criminality was never far away. In 2002, Howell picked up more convictions for minor offences. By this time, he was a frequent visitor to the Berlin Turnpike area, a 10-minute drive from the home he shared with Dorothy.
The Berlin Turnpike has many commercial establishments, restaurants, hotels, motels, different shopping centers.
Well, the Berlin Turnpike was one of the main roads that used to go between New York and Boston. So there were a lot of little hotels. And over time, those hotels stopped being used by conventional travelers and ended up being used by hookers and johns and more nefarious type of activity.
William Devin Howell was drawn to the area where drugs and prostitution went hand in hand.
Many people who are females who are drug addicts, they end up prostituting themselves in order to get the money. And Mr. Howell was able to get some drugs and party with these women.
In April 2003, a young woman was reported missing from a town some 25 miles from the Berlin Turnpike.
Melanie Ruth Camellini, she was from Seymour, Connecticut. She went missing from the city of Waterbury. She was the mother of two, dearly loved by her family.
When 29-year-old Melanie's mother reported her missing to Waterbury police, she hadn't seen her daughter for several months.
Waterbury PD was taking point on it in the missing person report. Terrific investigators.
Despite an investigation, there were no leads into Melanie's disappearance. A month later, there was another missing persons report in the same town.
Marilyn Gonzalez was 26. She too was a mother of two.
Last seen on the 15th of May 2003, Marilyn was reported missing by her mother a few days later.
Her loved ones were just frantically trying to what happened to her.
On the 24th of June, another desperate mother went to the police, this time in New Britain.
Janice Roberts is a transgender woman. She was in her 40s at the time. Her family thought that she went to New York City and possibly ran into some trouble down there. They just didn't know.
No one knew if the missing women had chosen to leave the area or if something more sinister had befallen them.
Even when all of these women were reported missing, they weren't linked by the police. Things are made more complicated when people go missing from different police jurisdictions because they don't necessarily always share that information. They won't be looking at the missing person lists from neighboring jurisdictions.
By the summer of 2003, 3 women were missing from towns in the Berlin Turnpike area. There was no uproar, no panic. Women weren't safe on the streets, but they had no idea. In July 2003, 33-year-old William Devin Howell was living with his girlfriend in New Britain, Connecticut. On the 31st of July, the mother and sister of 33-year-old Nilsa Arizmendi walked into Wethersfield Police Department 9 miles away and reported that they hadn't seen Nilsa for almost a week.
Nilsa Arizmendi had an on and off relationship with her childhood sweetheart, who was always known as Ace, and they were living in a motel in New Britain.
She was a drug user, might have engaged in some prostitution also.
She had quite a stable life, actually, so her disappearance was flagged up as this is out of the ordinary for Nilsa.
Nilsa's boyfriend Ace, a convicted drug dealer, was first on the list of people to question. Insisting he had no idea what had happened to Nilsa, Ace passed a polygraph test. Worried sick about his girlfriend's disappearance, Ace was desperate to help.
He gave the police all the information he had.
Ace told detectives about the last time he'd seen Nilsa. It was late at night, after the couple had been hanging out with a man they knew only as Devin.
Nilsa, her boyfriend, and this guy were doing drugs in a parking lot at a supermarket in Wethersfield. After that, her boyfriend saw her get into this weird-looking van that was partly blue, partly black, and had wood boards where the side windows should have been.
It was the first solid lead into working out what had happened to Nilsa.
The blue van became the target of the Wethersfield Police Department's investigation.
The name Devin and the description of a van were all police had to go on in the search for Nilsa. But 2 months later, a sharp-eyed patrol officer spotted the vehicle in Wethersfield.
So they traced the van. The van is traced back. The owner is Dorothy Holcomb.
And that's when they went to Ms. Holcomb's residence trying to interview her.
Police records showed a man had been living at Dorothy's address. One with an outstanding warrant for an assault on his girlfriend. His name was William Devin Howell.
When the police arrived to talk to Dorothy, she said, "Oh, well, Bill has the van most of the time. It's just registered my name."
He tried to dodge the interviews, and she kind of protected him from the police. You know, they'd come in the front door, he'd go out the back door type of thing.
Detectives were desperate to interview the man last seen with Nilsa, but he kept evading them. Meanwhile, they turned their focus on the van Nilsa had climbed into the night she disappeared.
They got a search warrant for the vehicle.
But when they returned in November to seize the battered blue van, neither Howell nor the vehicle were anywhere to be seen. In January 2004, Wethersfield police finally caught up with William Devin Howell. The gardener denied any involvement in Nilsa Arizmendi's disappearance, and his van, which they hoped might hold some clues, was still nowhere to be found.
Part of the problem was they didn't have her body. They didn't know what happened to her. She could have taken off. No one knew that she was dead at that point.
With no van, no evidence, and nothing to tie him to Nilsa beyond the word of her boyfriend, detectives had no choice but to let Howell go. Weeks later, another young woman was reported missing by her family.
Joy Verleen, also known as Joy Martinez, she's 24. Joy Verleen was a popular girl at school. She was a track star.
Born into a large and loving family, somewhere between her late teens and early 20s, Joy Verleen had fallen into drugs. She'd last been seen in October 2003.
She doesn't appear for her birthday, which her mother finds quite strange, and then she doesn't appear at Thanksgiving.
On the 29th of March 2004, Joy's mother reported her missing to police in East Hartford. 2 days later, in Wethersfield, the team who were searching for Nilsa Arismendi finally had some luck, 600 miles away from Connecticut.
They found the vehicle in North Carolina, the blue van. They then got a search warrant, and then they have the van towed back.
The van had been hidden on a property belonging to one of Howell's associates. 8 months after Nilsa Arismendi vanished, would it hold any clues about what had happened to her?
The crime scene investigators are let loose on the Ford Econoline van.
They noticed that the back seat, the cushions had been replaced, and they ended up pulling those cushions back, and then they found what they believed was blood, and then reddish-brown stains on the carpeting.
This disturbing find suggested that someone had lost a large amount of blood in the back of the battered work van. The question was, who?
The police department submitted a piece of the car seat back and a piece of the carpet from the van to the laboratory.
Forensic science examiner Kristen Maydell was part of the team at the State Forensic Lab, tasked with analyzing the stains on the upholstery. The first set of tests confirmed the stains were, in fact, human blood. The next step was to find out who the blood had belonged to. When the results came back, there was a shock.
From the initial testing of those two samples, they were two different DNA profiles.
It appeared that at least 2 people had come to harm in Howell's van. As is common in missing persons cases in the US, Nilsa Arismendi's mother had given the police a DNA sample when her daughter disappeared.
DNA gets passed from parent to child, where you get half your nuclear DNA from your mother and half your nuclear DNA from your father.
If human remains were found, the authorities would be able to say if the victim was likely to be a close relative of Nilsa's mother. Sadly for Nilsa's family, there was a match.
The mother of the missing person did match the DNA profile from the van.
It was an important breakthrough for the case, but a body blow for Nilsa's anxiously waiting family.
The medical examiner said she couldn't have survived that much blood loss.
It seems certain that Nilsa Arismendi was dead. Police had no idea who the second DNA profile belonged to, with more questions than answers about what had happened in Howell's van. Investigators needed to tread carefully.
It takes a long time for the prosecutors to be absolutely sure that they can charge Howell with Nilsa's killing. Blood in the van, opportunity, the fact that Ace had seen her getting into the van. But the difficulty is there's no body.
On the 14th of May 2005, William Devin Howell was arrested in connection with Nilsa Arismendi's death. 3 days later, he was charged with her murder. But the police knew getting a conviction would be tough.
The problem was they didn't know what happened to her. They knew something bad happened in the van, but there was no weapon, there was no trace of the body.
Howell was remanded in custody until his trial. For now, a suspected killer was off the streets. But would it be for good? Almost 4 years after Nilsa Arismendi's disappearance, 36-year-old William Devin Howell stood in the dock at New Britain's Superior Court in Connecticut.
On the 24th of January 2007, William Devin Howell stands trial for the murder of Nilsa Arismendi. The DNA evidence is produced. Witnesses, including Ace, are produced.
Howell's defense was that it was her boyfriend Ace who'd attacked Nilsa, arguing the couple had fought in the back of the van. The prosecution highlighted the amount of blood spilled in the van and the fact that Nilsa hadn't been seen since that night. On the 5th day of the trial, Howell changed his plea.
He did a plea bargain and he used something called the Alford plea.
What the Alford doctrine stands for is you'd say, I understand if I go to trial, there's a significant chance I'll be convicted and face harsher punishment. So in order to avoid that, I'm going to plead guilty, even though I'm not admitting my guilt.
On the 30th of January, Howell pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. Still refusing to give any information about what had happened to Nilsa Arismendi or where her remains could be found, Howell was jailed for 15 years. Just months later, on the 20th of August 2007, local police got a phone call that had the potential to shed light on Nilsa's fate.
The New Britain Police Department got a call from a resident who was walking through some woods off of Hartford Road in New Britain, and he said he found what he thought were human remains. I was a lieutenant in the bureau at that point, so we responded, we canvassed the scene.
That area is very commercial. It was like a little strip mall, and in the back is a little parking area. And right below that is a steep drop-off, and then there's a wooded area.
It's really not a place you would easily walk through because of the briar, some of the wildlife that's there, or completely swampy. It goes underwater quite a bit. It's not where someone would want to walk and go have a picnic.
More officers were brought in to search the densely wooded area.
We found a few more remains that evening and into the next day. And that's when we discovered it wasn't the remains of one person, but it was the remains of 2 females.
Confirming that they had found the partial remains of 2 adult women, the state medical examiner gave an estimate as to how long the scattered bones had laid there.
He gave us a very wide range, with the caveat is depends on weather, depends on animal activity. So we knew they weren't hundreds of years old. We knew that they weren't a year old.
A couple of days later, a 3rd partial skeleton was recovered. There was nothing with the bodies to identify them, but one conclusion seemed inevitable. The women had all likely been murdered, and almost certainly by the same assailant.
We certainly were working on the strong possibility that we had a serial killer.
With William Devin Howell's conviction fresh in the minds of local law enforcement, the question on everyone's lips was, could any of the bodies be Nilsa Arismendi's? The state forensic lab was brought in once again.
They submitted a sample from the 3 different possible bodies for us to do DNA testing on.
DNA profiles were developed from the bones, but when they were run through the DNA database, there was more disappointment for Nilsa's family.
We did try to make a connection with Nilsa, but there were no matches there.
In fact, there were no matches in the system for any of the women. Without knowing who they were, investigating the women's deaths would prove difficult.
If you don't know who the person is that has been killed, it's near on impossible to identify your suspects. There's always a motive for every murder. You're never going to find out what that motive is unless you identify the body.
New Britain police threw themselves into working out who the women were.
Looking at unsolved missing persons reports and just try to chase them all down. The FBI down in Quantico offered their services to create an approximation of 2 of our victims. We put it in the newspapers, gave it to the media.
It was a slow and frustrating process. And as James Wardwell and his team worked to identify the victims, they couldn't shake the suspicion there might be more bodies lying in the woods.
Never stopped believing there was more in there. Still believed in our heart of hearts Nilsa was in there. Still believing that there might be more victims.
Were police on the right track? Was William Devin Howell in fact a serial killer? With Nilsa just one of his victims?
We certainly were keeping all options open because we don't know yet, but that was definitely a working theory, that there was a connection, and Nilsa was also connected to our site.
In December 2010, New Britain PD got their first breakthrough when a woman called introducing herself as the sister-in-law of New Britain resident Diane Cusack. She'd seen the photo in the papers of the facial reconstruction of one of the unidentified women.
She said, "Oh, the face sure looks like Diane. The hair's wrong, but the face looked right."
Diane Cusack lived alone in New Britain. I don't think she really was in contact with her family. She wasn't reported missing right away.
So we were ultimately able to make that connection through dental records and DNA and made our first positive ID. I remember sitting down at their kitchen table and sharing that news with them. I know it brought them pain, but I could see it also brought them some relief. I remember it like yesterday, that part, because it's nobody deserves what happened to her.
The tragedy for Diane Cusack and her family was nonetheless an important step forward in the investigation.
Really started opening everything, because then we could start retracing her steps, placing her in places.
53-year-old Diane hadn't been seen since July 2003. She'd lived in the same neighborhood as William Devin Howell, and the police believed they may have crossed paths. But there was no proof or evidence to link Diane to Howell. The investigation went cold until 2013.
Connecticut State's Attorney's Office has a cold case unit, and they put a task force together.
DNA from the remains in the woods was resubmitted to the State Forensics Lab. And in September 2013, there was another positive ID.
Joy Valine Martinez, she was actually the first remains that were found that first day in 2007.
The breakthrough also provided crucial evidence that William Howell had killed more than once. The second person's blood found along with Nilsa's in the back of Howell's van was proven to be 23-year-old Joy Valine's. The case was building, but detectives suspected there was much they still did not know. In 2014, they tried something new.
One of the things that the State's Attorney's Cold Case Squad did was make playing cards of unsolved homicides that they distributed in all the prisons.
They're free for the inmates to use, and just ask if anyone has information, please call to spark conversations.
One inmate couldn't believe the hand he'd been dealt. William Devin Howell, who was a decade into his sentence for the manslaughter of Nilsa Arismendi, was about to blow the investigation wide open. At Connecticut's Cheshire Correctional Institution in 2015, 45-year-old William Devin Howell opened up to his cellmate, Jonathan Mills, revealing what had really happened to Nilsa Arismendi 12 years earlier. Around 3 a.m. that night in July 2003, Nilsa and her boyfriend, who sometimes took drugs with Howell, met him in a supermarket car park.
He sees Nilsa climb into Bill Howell's dark blue Ford Econoline van and drive off.
Shortly after Nilsa entered Howell's van, he attacked her, punching her in the face, causing her nose to bleed heavily. He then grabbed her round the throat.
She is strangled and she is dumped behind the shopping mall.
But Nilsa had not been his first victim.
He tells Mills that I didn't just kill Nilsa, I killed 6 other people as well.
Howell told Mills his first victim early in 2003 had been Melanie Ruth Camillini. Howell had raped and strangled her in the back of his van.
It was too cold to bury her body, and so he literally drove around with her body in the van for several weeks.
He used to sleep next to her, calling her his baby.
And he cut off her fingertips and tore off the bottom of her jaw to take her bottom teeth out and put them in a garbage bag and threw them in a dumpster. He told Mills that once he had killed the first woman, that was like crossing the Rubicon, and it became easier after that, and he perfected his method, is I think how he put it.
Over the next 10 months, William Devin Howell had targeted women on the fringes of society.
Most of all these focused around drugs, whether Howell was providing them or they were getting in his van because they were going to do drugs with him.
Once in the back of the vehicle that Howell called his murder-mobile, the women were brutally attacked.
There was a lot of violence, physical violence, strangulation, hitting them with objects, a hammer, for instance.
He controlled these women. He was a big guy.
With his second victim, 26-year-old Marilyn Gonzalez, restrained through the night in the back of his van, Howell drove around the local area.
He actually went through a drive-thru to buy her last meal. She ate the meal and he raped her and killed her.
Referring to himself as a sick ripper in his disturbing confession to his cellmate, Howell also shed light on the fate of a woman who'd been reported missing in June 2003.
Howell's third victim, who he picked up on the 18th of June 2003, was Janice Roberts. But actually, she was transgender.
While a sexual act was being performed, Mr. Howell realized it was a trans person doing it, which caused him to become very angry.
Howell strangled 44-year-old Janice to death. After the orgy of violence, Howell would dispose of his victims' bodies.
Howell told them about what he called his garden, and Mills realized what he was talking about was where he buried victims.
The victims were just discarded like objects and not as people, like yesterday's rubbish. Just awful.
Howell told Mills that after Melanie, Marilyn, and Janice, he'd murdered Diane Cusack. The next victim was Nilsa Arismendi, followed by Joyvaline Martinez. Then Howell confessed to a final victim from October 2003, a 40-year-old woman from Waterbury who'd never been reported missing.
Mary Jane Maynard went out to buy cigarettes, and I suspect she just encountered Howell, who was often driving around the area, possibly looking for victims. Mary Jane's daughter was serving overseas at the time, so nobody noticed that Mary Jane had gone missing.
Mary's partial remains were amongst those found in 2007 and had finally been identified in September 2014.
One of the tragedies of Mary Jane Maynard is that although she'd had a substance abuse problem, she turned her life around and she'd in fact become a counsellor, making her death all the more tragic and all the more cruel.
Having heard William Howell's horrifying story, Jonathan Mills hoped it might gain him some goodwill with the authorities.
Mr. Mills contacted his lawyer contacted the prosecutors.
Howell had boasted of 6 murders in addition to Nilsa's death. The problem for the police was that they only had 3 bodies. All of them had been identified, and none of them were Nilsa. Incredibly, Jonathan Mills had the information the police needed.
He showed him this map of what he believed where Howell's garden was. Howell had described like there were electrical wires and telephone poles and certain things in there where he had buried them.
Between April and May 2015, 12 years after the killings, they returned to the swamp.
With the assistance of this amazing cadaver dog, within days we had found the burial sites of all of our victims.
They found an additional 4 different human remains.
Once again, the state forensics lab played a crucial role.
So they submitted a sampling from each of the 4 different bodies in order to try and determine who they were by doing DNA testing on those bones. DNA profiles were developed.
They tracked down family members, got their DNAs, and then compared those DNAs to the bones that were recovered, and then were able to identify the individuals.
By June 2015, the bodies had been identified as Janice Roberts, Melanie Ruth Camellini, Marilyn Gonzalez, and the one victim Howell had been convicted of killing, Nilsa Arismendi. After more than a decade, the families of the women were learning of their fate.
They were waiting for answers, praying that these were not the answers they were going to get. We couldn't change what was done, but we could change the way their loved ones were treated from then on out, and that justice is brought for them.
But to get justice, detectives needed to build a case against William Devin Howell, the only suspect in the 6 murders. They believed the key to the case was Howell's battered blue work van.
So we got a search warrant, got the van that was held in storage by the Wethersfield Police Department. So it was still just sitting there like as if in a time capsule. We brought in the state police evidence technicians because their skill level is just tremendous. And they just started to pick that van apart, fiber by fiber, droplet by droplet.
They submitted a whole bunch more evidence from the van that consisted of cigarette butts, hairs, hairbrush.
There was a rock that appeared to have blood on it, as well as 6 graphic homemade videotapes.
There was over 200 pieces of evidence submitted from the van at this point.
The results of the DNA analysis were damning. Blood, hair, and other traces were found in the back of the van that match with 6 of the 7 victims.
In September 2015, Howell is charged with the 6 murders.
For the next 2 years, the police and prosecution prepared their case against Howell.
We wanted to convict. We wanted absolutely whoever was responsible for what happened to these ladies to be brought to justice. We wanted to make sure every T was crossed, every I was dotted, so it was meticulous work.
William Petzold was appointed as Howell's defense attorney, faced with the mammoth task of defending Howell against the prosecution's claims.
So they put the case together, and it was a mountain of evidence. It was, in my opinion, an insurmountable mountain to overcome.
Presented with the evidence against him, Howell and his attorney came to a decision.
He ultimately pled guilty and was sentenced to 360 years. Families were emotional. Certainly some relief that justice is being served, but anger too, sadness. No matter what, none of what the court system was going to do was going to bring their loved ones back.
"47-year-old Howell's statement at the sentencing hearing at New Britain's Superior Court was the first time any of the families had heard him speak.
He started to cry and he said, "I'm going to stay in prison. I'm not a well man. I'm going to die a slow, painful death." In no way was he actually trying to give any comfort to the victims' families.
He was thinking of himself. You know, we were sitting with the families. Maybe some thought should have been for them. That's not where he went.
In fact, one of Howell's comments to his cellmate had betrayed his true feelings about the 7 victims.
Howell said that his victims should have known that they were going to die, you know, just because of the kind of lives that they led.
He didn't think of these beautiful people as people. This is my take on it.
In a 10-month killing spree across 2003, Howell abducted, brutalized, and killed 7 women in the van he callously called his murder mobile, before dumping their bodies where he hoped they'd never be found. His victims' loved ones waited 14 years for justice, but when it finally came, they were left with no doubt that William Devin Howell is one of the world's most evil killers.
It began with rain. Not the soft kind that lulls you to sleep, but the cold, biting drizzle that clings to your clothes and seeps under your skin. The kind that makes silence feel heavier. On the morning of November 12th, 1995, in a quiet Oregon town tucked between the Cascades and the endless pines, that silence was broken by the sound of a mother's voice trembling, calling a name that would soon echo across decades. Her daughter, 17-year-old Emily Larson, had vanished. She was last seen walking home from the local diner after her evening shift. A short walk 6 blocks through streets lined with rusting mailboxes and flickering porch lights. But she never made it home. When her father found her backpack lying in a puddle near the railroad crossing, unzipped and soaked, something in him shattered. It wasn't what he saw, it was what he didn't. Her favorite silver bracelet was gone, her notebook pages torn, and the footprints beside the pack. 2 sets, one smaller, one heavier, pressed deep into the mud. By sunrise, the town was awake and fear began to crawl through every conversation. People who once left their doors unlocked started checking the bolts twice. The sheriff's office called in volunteers and search dogs, traced her scent through the woods until it ended abruptly near the edge of a ravine, as if she had vanished into the earth itself. The media swarmed in whispering words that would stick like tar abduction, possible homicide, cold trail. Days turned to weeks. The rain didn't stop. And as the flyers faded and curled on telephone poles, hope did too. Emily's parents gave interviews, their voices dry and cracked. Her mother kept her room untouched, bed-made clock, still ticking the last cup she drank from, left on the desk. But the town moved on. Slowly, shamefully, they moved on. For 27 years, the name Emily Larson became more legend than memory. Teenagers told her story at bonfires, the girl who disappeared under the November fog. Some said a drifter did it. Others said she ran away. The case file sat in a dusty cabinet at the county sheriff's office, sealed in a manila folder, with the words Unresolved Cold Case 1995 stamped across the front. Then in 2022, a new detective opened it again. Her name was Sarah Holden, 36, relentless, with eyes that didn't know how to look away. She'd grown up in the same county, had been a child when Emily disappeared. For her, this wasn't just another case. It was a shadow that had always lived in the corner of her hometown. Sarah began where everyone else had stopped the evidence box. Inside were the fragments of a vanished life, a bracelet with faint initials, the notebook, the soil sample taken from the tracks. Technology had changed, and so had the science of truth. She ordered DNA testing on every scrap that could hold a secret. When the results came back, the first tremor ran through the quiet. Partial male DNA too degraded to match back in 95 now lit up in the system. Not a direct hit, but a relative match. Somewhere a bloodline whispered. The database pointed to a family still living in the same county. A familiar name. Too familiar. Sarah drove out to a weathered farmhouse outside town. She'd been there before, not as a detective, but as a girl. Family friend barbecues, summer birthdays, the house of the man everyone called Uncle Ray. Raymond Carter, 64, retired mechanic, lived alone after his wife passed. Known, trusted, ordinary. The kind of man who helped fix your car and never charged you for parts. She knocked. He opened the door with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Inside, the air smelled of oil coffee and old memories. The walls were lined with photographs, family gatherings, church picnics, hunting trips. In one of them, Emily stood in the background, barely 14, laughing beside her father. And beside her was Ray. When Sarah told him why she'd come, he chuckled, soft defensive. That was a long time ago, he said. You people still chasing ghosts? His hands didn't tremble, but his eyes did. She noticed a faded scar on his wrist. She noticed how he didn't ask about Emily, only about how they found his name. A warrant came 2 weeks later. DNA swabs, property search, excavation of the backyard ground that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Beneath a rotting woodpile, under layers of packed dirt and rusted tools, they found what the rain had hidden all those years: bone fragments, a scrap of denim, a single silver charm in the shape of a heart. The tests confirmed it. Emily Larson had been buried less than a mile from where she vanished. The small town that once whispered theories now screamed disbelief. The killer was not a stranger. He'd been there through the vigils, the search parties, the fundraisers. He'd hugged her mother and promised, "We'll find her." When detectives confronted Ray with the evidence, he said nothing, just stared out the window as if watching the same rain that had fallen the night it happened. The silence lasted hours. Then, in a low voice, almost tender, he said, "She just wouldn't stop screaming." The confession came out in pieces, jagged, incomplete. He claimed it was an accident, that he offered her a ride home, that she panicked when he missed her street, that things got out of hand. But the forensics told another story. There were bruises, restraints, deliberate concealment. He'd returned to the site again and again over the years, tending his garden over her grave. When the news broke, the town cracked in half. Reporters filled the streets. The headline burned across every screen: Oregon 1995, cold case, solved, killer turns out to be family friend. People stared at his face on television and saw not a monster, but a man who'd once fixed their fence, waved at their kids, prayed beside them in church. At Emily's memorial, held 27 years late, her mother stood before the crowd. She said she had imagined this day 1,000 times, finding peace, finding answers, but it didn't feel like justice. "He stole her life," she whispered, "and then he stole our memories of her." Detective Holden stayed until the last candle burned out. She knew the file would finally be closed, but closure is a word that sounds cleaner than it feels. As the wind moved through the trees, she thought of the small town that had learned to live with ghosts, and how every truth, no matter how long it hides, leaves a trail behind, sometimes in blood, sometimes in silence. And as she drove away, the rain started again. The same November rain, the same quiet. Only this time it carried the sound of a story ending and the weight of a question that will never fade. How well do we really know the people we trust? Under the dull glow of fluorescent light, the interrogation room felt smaller than it was. The walls were plain gray, soundproofed, swallowing every breath. Detective Sarah Holden sat across from Raymond Carter, the man who'd haunted her hometown from the shadows, without anyone ever realizing it. Between them, the tape recorder clicked on. The air was heavy metallic and still. He didn't look like a murderer. That was the worst part. His face carried the calm of someone who'd spent a lifetime blending in wrinkles, carved by sun and grease eyes, pale and glassy, like frozen water. His hands rested neatly on the table fingers, interlaced nails clean. He'd even combed his hair before the arrest, as if preparing for a family photo instead of a confession. Sarah studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You said it was an accident," she began, her voice low, steady. "Tell me what accident looks like, Ray." He smiled faintly, almost pitying her. "You're too young to remember," he said. "That girl, she was always running her mouth. Thought she was smarter than everyone. I was just trying to help her get home." He paused, searching her face for something sympathy maybe, but Sarah's eyes were cold glass. "What happened when she got in your truck?" she asked. Ray's hands tightened. "She got scared, started yelling. Said she'd tell her daddy I tried to touch her. I panicked. She hit me. I hit her back. She fell. That's all." His voice broke on that last word, but it wasn't guilt. It was the exhaustion of a man who'd rehearsed the lie too many times. Sarah leaned in the shadows, cutting sharp lines across her face. "And then what?" Ray looked at the wall instead of her. "You know what I did. You dug it up." For a moment, the hum of the lights was the only sound in the room. Sarah pressed the recorder closer. "You went back there, didn't you, over the years?" His eyes flicked toward her, a glint of something dark behind the calm. "I couldn't just leave her there like that," he said softly. "I made sure it was neat, clean. I kept the place up. You wouldn't understand, it wasn't about guilt. It was Peace. Sarah felt her stomach turn. You gardened over her grave, she said, voice trembling now, for 27 years. Ray tilted his head slightly. She liked flowers. The tape clicked again. Outside the room, the sheriff and the DA watched through the glass. Neither spoke. They'd seen confessions before, but not like this, not the quiet kind where horror hides behind ordinary words. When it was over, Ray signed the statement without reading it. He asked for coffee, black, no sugar, and when Sarah handed it to him, he said, "You did good, detective." The town can rest now, but there was something unfinished in his tone, something that made her pause. It wasn't fear, she felt. It was the sinking weight of knowing this story wasn't over. The news exploded within hours. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Satellite trucks rolled through the narrow streets, antennas stretching toward the gray sky like insect limbs. Every headline screamed the same words: Oregon 1995, cold case, solved killer turns out to be family friend. The town of Pine Hollow became a spectacle. Old wounds reopened. People who hadn't spoken in decades came forward with stories, small details, fragments of memory that suddenly took on a new light. A woman who said Ray fixed her porch light in '97 stayed too long talking about her daughter. A man who remembered seeing him near the diner weeks after Emily disappeared. Every recollection carried the same undertone unease they hadn't dared to name. At the sheriff's office, boxes of new evidence piled up. Tips poured in from nearby counties. People wondered if Emily had been his only victim. Sarah didn't dismiss the possibility. She started digging into Ray's past employment records, vehicle logs, old friends. On paper, he was unremarkable. A mechanic, a volunteer firefighter, a husband until his wife died of cancer in 2004. But the deeper she looked, the more inconsistencies surfaced. A gap in his work history. A sudden move from Northern California to Oregon in the early 90s. A missing woman from that same California town, last seen in a vehicle matching his old pickup. The thought chilled her. Cold cases don't end, they multiply. Sarah requested a task force reopened files that hadn't been touched in decades. She spent nights alone in the evidence room reading yellowed reports until dawn. Somewhere in the noise, a pattern began to form a trail that ran through states, through years, through silence. But the town only wanted one thing: closure. They'd waited too long for justice to start asking more questions. The DA announced they'd pursue a single charge, Emily's murder, to guarantee a conviction. We'll never know the full truth, he said at the press conference. But at least her family can finally rest. Emily's parents didn't speak that day. They sat side by side, hands locked, eyes hollow. The word rest meant nothing to them. When Ray's trial began, the courtroom overflowed. Every seat filled, the air thick with whispers and the smell of old wood polish. The prosecution laid out the evidence with surgical precision. DNA confession, recovered remains. The defense called it a tragic accident, claimed Ray panicked, claimed remorse. But the jury didn't buy it. They looked at him and saw not a man but the face of betrayal. During closing arguments, Sarah sat behind the family. She watched Ray as the prosecutor held up the silver heart charm, Emily's, and said, "He kept this for 27 years. You tell me what kind of man does that." Ray didn't flinch. He just stared straight ahead, expressionless. The verdict came fast. Guilty of first-degree murder, life without parole. The room erupted in sound sobs, gasps, a whisper of applause swallowed by grief. Emily's mother wept silently, clutching the bracelet like a rosary. But Sarah didn't move. Her mind stayed fixed on one thing Ray had said during interrogation. "You people still chasing ghosts?" the way he'd said ghosts plural. After sentencing, she visited his holding cell. The corridor smelled of bleach and rust. Guards nodded her through. Ray sat on the bunk, eyes distant, tracing invisible lines on the concrete wall. "You said ghosts," she said. "Who else?" He smiled, slow, deliberate. "You think I'm going to make it easy for you?" Sarah stepped closer. "You killed more than one girl, didn't you?" Ray's eyes flickered the briefest flash of amusement. "Some stories don't belong to you, Detective Holden," he said. "Some you just have to live with." Then he turned his back to her. Conversation over. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Rain hammered the roof of her apartment, same as it had in '95. She replayed the interrogation, the trial, the town's celebration. Everyone thought the nightmare was over, but for her it was just beginning. Because monsters like Ray don't appear out of nowhere. They grow in the cracks of places that don't want to look too closely. In the weeks that followed, Sarah kept getting letters. No return address, neat handwriting. Each one contained a short message typed unsigned. You found one grave, there are others. Check the river south of Albany. He wasn't alone. The first time she read them, she thought it was a prank, a sick fascination from someone following the case online. But when divers searched the coordinates mentioned in the second letter, they found something. A rusted metal box, half buried in silt. Inside a bracelet, a torn photograph of another young woman, dated 1993. Sarah stood by the water's edge as the crime lab sealed the evidence. Wind rippled across the surface, cold and colorless. Somewhere behind her, a reporter shouted her name, asking if this meant there were more victims. She didn't answer. She just stared at the river, thinking of Ray's smile, and of how truth always leaves a wake. The media called it the ripple effect, a story that began with one cold case now threatened to expose a series of hidden lives buried under the weight of time and silence. The town once again was gripped by fear. Doors closed earlier. Parents whispered warnings. The word trust became foreign. And deep in his cell, Raymond Carter began to write letters of his own. Rain beat softly against the glass of Detective Sarah Holden's office. The smell of wet pine filled the air carried in through the cracked window. It had been 4 months since the sentencing, 4 months since the town of Pine Hollow exhaled and pretended the nightmare was over. But nightmares don't end. They evolve. The letters kept coming, each one stamped from different counties, each typed on an old typewriter, the same faint misalignment in the letter E, the same ribbon smudge after punctuation. Whoever was sending them knew how to stay invisible. Sarah spread them across her desk like evidence in a ritual. You found one grave. There are others. He wasn't alone. She knew what happened. The last one hit harder. It arrived folded neatly in an envelope with no postmark, slipped under her office door sometime in the night. A faint perfume clung to it, old-fashioned floral, the kind you might find in a drawer of forgotten clothes. For weeks, Sarah had ignored the urge to reopen anything. The DA wanted her focused on clearing the backlog. The town wanted silence, and the media had moved on to fresher tragedies. But the letters felt alive like a heartbeat under the floorboards. Something unfinished, waiting. She traced the typewriter marks again, then reached for her phone. Within minutes, she was on her way to the state penitentiary. Raymond Carter hadn't changed much behind bars. His hair was thinner, his posture more resigned, but his eyes, those calm, calculating eyes, still carried the same steady arrogance. He smiled when she entered the visiting room, as if he'd been expecting her. "Detective Holden," he said softly, leaning into the microphone. "Did you miss me?" Sarah didn't sit down. "You're sending letters," she said flatly. He chuckled, low and rasping. "You think I can mail things from in here?" "They read everything I write. I don't even get to pick my own toothpaste." "Someone's writing them for you," she pressed. "Maybe someone's just interested in your work," he said. "You're a celebrity now. Pine Hollow's golden detective. Every reporter wants a piece of you." His tone was syrup sweet, suffocating. She stared at him, trying to read the small shifts in his expression, the micro-tells of guilt or amusement. "You said she liked flowers," Sarah said. "Emily. You remembered the way she screamed, the way she fought. But now, you can't remember anyone else. No other names." Ray smiled again, a thin, crooked grin that didn't belong on a human face. "Names are dangerous things," he said. "They make the dead too real." The guard signaled the end of visitation. Ray stood adjusting his uniform and leaned close enough for Sarah to see the lines etched around his mouth. "You're looking in the wrong place," he murmured. "The river doesn't keep secrets, but the woods do." That night, Sarah drove the back roads outside on headlights, cutting through fog that curled like smoke around the trees. She didn't know what she was searching for, maybe a feeling. Maybe confirmation that he was playing her again. But the road that led into those woods was the same one Emily had walked in 1995. the same dirt, the same silence. At the turnoff near the old sawmill, she stopped. Something moved in the distance, a faint glimmer of light through the pines. She stepped out, flashlight in hand, her boots sinking into the wet earth. The air was heavy thick with the scent of moss and decay. 50 yards in, she found it, a small wooden cross nailed to a tree barely visible under the moss. No name, no date. Just a scrap of ribbon fluttering in the wind. She crouched down, scanning the ground. A flash of metal caught her eye. A locket, half buried, rusted shut. Inside, when she pried it open, was a faded photograph of another girl. Blonde hair, freckles, maybe 16. The case that wouldn't end had just started again. She returned to the office at dawn, mud still on her boots locket, sealed in an evidence bag. Running the photo through the missing persons database took seconds, and when the match appeared, Sarah's pulse stopped. Lisa Monroe, missing since 1993, last seen in Red Bluff, California. The same town Raymond Carter had left just months before moving to Oregon. Sarah printed the record, spread it beside the letters, the photograph, and Emily's old file. The lines connected themselves. 2 girls, same age, same disappearance pattern, and now 2 graves. When she called the DA, he sighed before she finished speaking. "Sarah, the case is closed. Don't start this again." Lisa Monroe vanished 2 years before Emily. Carter lived there. The evidence fits. You don't have jurisdiction in California. Let it go. But Sarah couldn't. She'd spent her life chasing ghosts, and this one wasn't done whispering. 2 days later, she was in Red Bluff, driving past abandoned gas stations and dusty farms under the pale gold of the setting sun. She stopped at a diner where the missing girl's photo still hung on the wall, yellowed and curling. The waitress, gray-haired and tired, recognized the picture immediately. "Lisa," she said softly. "Sweet kid. Waitress here. One night she just didn't come back from her shift." Sarah felt the echo of another life, same story, different town. The waitress frowned. There was this man back then, local mechanic, always fixing people's cars for free. Came in here a lot. Real friendly type. Can't remember his name. Ray Carter, Sarah said quietly. The woman's eyes widened. "That's it. You know him." Sarah didn't answer. That night, she visited the old garage where Ray had worked, now boarded up, paint-peeling weeds breaking through the concrete. Inside, the smell of oil and rust lingered like a ghost. She swept her flashlight across the workbenches, the floor, the cracked walls. Then, behind a stack of rusted license plates, she saw it, a piece of cardboard pinned to the wall. On it, faded handwriting, Lisa's tune. Underneath, taped with yellowed scotch, was a torn corner of a photograph, just a girl's eye, and part of her smile. Sarah's chest tightened. The handwriting matched Ray's old maintenance forms. When she returned to Oregon, the prison warden called. Ray had requested another meeting. She didn't want to go, but curiosity isn't something you silence. He was waiting, same seat, same smile. "You went digging," he said. "You knew I would," she replied. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I didn't kill that girl in California," he said, "but I knew who did." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who?" Ray looked past her, toward the guard, and whispered, "You already met her." The words sank like stones. Her mind flashed to the letter, the one that smelled of old perfume. She froze. "You're saying a woman helped you?" He didn't answer, just smiled again, slow, deliberate. When Sarah left the prison, the night air felt colder. The parking lot lights buzzed faintly above, casting her shadow long across the pavement. If he wasn't lying, and with Ray lies and truth were the same weapon, then someone else was still out there, someone who'd kept his secrets. She went back through every letter, the perfume, the neat folds, the careful phrasing, the typewriter smudge, and then it hit her in the old case photos there was one woman who appeared in every image from the '95 search parties. A neighbor, always beside Emily's mother. Her name, Margaret Carter, Ray's wife. Everyone had believed she died in 2004. But when Sarah checked the death certificate, it wasn't signed by a coroner, it was signed by a family friend, a small-town pastor. No hospital records, no burial records, no obituary. The realization crawled through her veins like ice. If Margaret was alive, she'd had 20 years to disappear, 20 years to hide in plain sight. Sarah picked up the phone and called the Postal Inspection Service. "I need tracking on letters sent from Oregon, Washington, and Northern California, vintage typewriter, distinct e-misprint, no return address." The agent hesitated. "We've seen similar envelopes," he said. "One sent just last week. From a small town in Montana." Sarah closed her eyes. Somewhere far from Pine Hollow, the story wasn't over. In her apartment that night, the rain began again, steady, relentless. She sat in the dark, the letters spread before her, the locket glinting faintly in the lamplight. The words on the last note echoed in her mind. He wasn't alone, and deep inside her, where logic ended and instinct began, Sarah knew the truth. Raymond Carter hadn't buried his past alone. He'd shared the shovel. Montana was a long way from Oregon, but the road felt familiar. Long stretches of silence, broken only by static on the radio, the hum of tires against cold asphalt, and the whisper of questions Sarah couldn't silence. Every mile brought her closer to something she didn't want to believe. The letters, the perfume, the missing wife, all threads in the same dark weave. She drove through that night until the mountains rose like black walls against the horizon. The town was called Stillwater, population barely 3,000, a place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stood out like noise in a quiet room. She checked into the only motel, a low, crumbling building with flickering neon that buzzed like a dying insect. The clerk barely looked up from his TV when she signed in. In her room, Sarah laid out the copies of the letters again. The faint floral scent had faded, but it was still there, ghost-like. On the back of the most recent envelope, the one postmarked from Montana, was a single fingerprint, partial, but clear enough to lift. She'd scanned it before leaving Oregon. If it matched Margaret Carter's old records, this trip would confirm what her instincts already screamed. At dawn, she drove to the local post office. The clerk, a man in his 70s with a soft voice and kind eyes, squinted at her badge. "You're looking for typewritten envelopes," he said, scratching his chin. "Yeah, we've had a few. Lady comes in every couple weeks, drops them off, always cash for postage. Quiet. Keeps to herself." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Do you remember what she looked like?" He thought for a moment. Older. White hair tied back, wore gloves even in summer, drove a blue pickup, old Ford. She said her name was Margaret. Sarah thanked him, then walked outside, her breath fogging in the cold morning air. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that made the world feel washed out and waiting. She called the sheriff's office and asked for local vehicle records. There it was, a Margaret Lane registered to an address just outside town, blue Ford truck, year 1998. It was too neat, too clean. A new name, but the same ghost. The house sat alone on a hill framed by pine trees and the remnants of snow. The mailbox was rusted, the flag bent. A wind chime whispered on the porch. Sarah parked at the end of the dirt driveway and stepped out, her boots crunching over gravel. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of wood, the wind threading through the branches, the echo of her heartbeat. She knocked once, no answer, knocked again. Then from inside, a faint voice. "Just a minute." When the door opened, the woman standing there was older, frailer than the photos, but the eyes were the same, pale blue, sharp as glass. She smiled politely. "Can I help you?" Sarah's badge caught the light. Margaret Carter. The smile faltered. "You must have the wrong person." Sarah held up the envelope. "Then maybe you can explain why your fingerprint is on this." For a long moment, the world seemed to pause. The woman's breath hitched. The wind stopped. Then she stepped aside. "You'd better come in," she said. Inside the house was immaculate. Every surface gleamed, every item placed with precision. The scent of lavender filled the air, the same perfume from the letters. On the mantel sat photographs, sunsets, fields, flowers. But no people. Not one. Margaret motioned toward a chair. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "He told me someone would." "Ray," she nodded. "He always said you were stubborn." Sarah studied her. "You've been writing to me. Why?" Margaret looked down, fingers trembling, as they toyed with her wedding ring, a ring that should have been buried 20 years ago. "Because you needed to see what they never did," she said. "They all thought he acted alone. But Ray was never capable of planning anything that clean. I helped him hide it. I helped him lie." The words hung in the air like ash. Sarah leaned forward. "Why? Why would you protect him?" Margaret's eyes filled with something that wasn't quite regret, not quite pride. "Because I loved him," she said. "And because love, detective, is a sickness no one wants to cure." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "How many?" Margaret stared at the floor. 3, maybe 4. Lisa, Emily, and 2 others we never spoke of again. They were just accidents that turned into habits. I cleaned up. I washed the blood, burned the clothes. I buried the things he couldn't look at. Her tone was calm, almost serene, as if she were describing chores, not murder. "Why come forward now?" Sarah demanded. Margaret sighed, eyes distant. "Because Ray's gone and I can't sleep. Every night I hear their voices. The woods don't forget, and neither does the river." Sarah reached for her phone. "You're confessing to multiple murders, Margaret. You understand what that means." The old woman nodded. "It means I finally stopped pretending to be alive." Sarah called for backup, her voice quiet, professional. But inside, her thoughts spun in static. This wasn't closure, it was a wound torn open all over again. By the time the deputies arrived, Margaret was sitting by the window, hands folded, eyes fixed on the snow. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. As they led her to the cruiser, she turned to Sarah and said, "He wanted to stop. I didn't." The drive back to the station was silent, except for the crackle of the police radio. When they processed her fingerprints, the database confirmed it. Margaret Carter, presumed deceased Oregon resident. Case reopened. The news hit Pine Hollow like a second storm. Oregon, 1995, cold case killer's wife confesses. Double life of a town's perfect couple. Family friend becomes family of killers. The town that once mourned together now tore itself apart with disbelief. How could both of them have lived among them, hosting barbecues, attending church, smiling for photos while hiding such horror behind closed doors? Sarah returned to Oregon for the official handover. The DA looked pale when he saw the new evidence. "If this is true," he said quietly, "we'll need to re-examine everything." Margaret was extradited to Oregon within a week. During transport, she said little except one thing that kept Sarah awake for nights. "You're not done yet," she whispered. "There's one more." One more what? One more victim. One more secret. Sarah searched the property records tied to the Carters, an old cabin deep in the woods, unused since 1996, hidden behind old logging roads and overgrown trails, the perfect place to disappear. She took a team there the next morning. The forest was still heavy with mist, the ground damp with decades of decay. The cabin leaned sideways, wood-splintered windows shattered. Inside, cobwebs hung like curtains, but under the floorboards, dogs began to bark, frantic, certain. What they uncovered wasn't a body. It was a box. Inside, a child's dress, a broken necklace, and a Polaroid photograph. 2 young girls smiling, one of them unmistakably Emily Larson, the other unknown. Sarah stared at the photo for a long time, the chill crawling up her spine. On the back, written in neat cursive, were 3 words: "He promised me." The implications twisted like a knife. Margaret hadn't just helped Ray, she'd wanted to be part of it. Maybe she'd even started it. That night, in her hotel room, Sarah listened to the recording of her earlier interview. Margaret's voice, calm and haunting. "Love is a sickness no one wants to cure." It wasn't love, Sarah thought. It was possession, the kind that eats everything it touches. As the tape played, the phone rang. It was the warden from the prison. "Detective Holden," he said. "You should sit down for this. Raymond Carter's dead." Sarah froze. "When?" "An hour ago. Found in his cell. No signs of struggle. Just gone." She hung up, staring at the dark window where her reflection stared back. Margaret was in custody. Ray was dead. But the box, the letters, the photo, none of it fit cleanly. The timeline didn't close. The story didn't end. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled over the valley, low and distant. Sarah whispered to herself, almost without realizing it. There's always one more. The camera would linger on that, the detective alone in a dim motel room surrounded by evidence that breathes. Rain on the glass, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any, and the faint echo of a woman's voice carried by the storm. "He promised me." The past wasn't done. It had only changed its face. The morning after Raymond Carter's death, the world felt quieter, heavier, like sound itself had been swallowed. Detective Sarah Holden sat in her car outside the county courthouse, watching the drizzle streak across the windshield, trying to make sense of the silence. Ray was gone. Margaret was in custody, and yet it didn't feel finished. It didn't feel real. In her rearview mirror, she could see reporters gathering by the courthouse steps, their cameras pointed at the doors like vultures waiting for a body. The story had grown its own wings, husband and wife serial team secrets of the Carter murders. Headlines turned human tragedy into spectacle. And still, the question haunted her, who was the girl in the Polaroid? The photo lay on the passenger seat beside her, sealed in a plastic sleeve. Two girls, one known, one nameless, both smiling under the Oregon sun as if they didn't know the darkness waiting behind the camera. On the back, 3 words written in careful cursive, "He promised me." She turned the phrase over in her mind until it lost meaning. Was it a note from Margaret, a message to Ray, or a plea from the girl who never came home? Back at the station, the evidence techs were still sorting through the items from the cabin, the box, the dress, the broken necklace. Each object cataloged, photographed, sealed. Sarah's desk was a sea of papers, coffee cups, and case files stacked like gravestones. She stared at the Polaroid again, then typed a new entry into the missing persons database, cross-referencing every unsolved disappearance in Oregon and Northern California between 1992 and 1996. Hundreds of names appeared. She filtered by age, by distance, by year. One entry stopped her cold. Abigail Dunn, 15, disappeared in 1994. Last seen leaving a church youth retreat outside Salem. The same weekend, Ray and Margaret's credit card showed a charge at a hardware store 20 miles away. Sarah exhaled slowly. Abigail's photo dark hair, gentle smile, a freckle near her left eye, matched the second girl in the Polaroid. It was her. Another victim erased by time. She called the sheriff. "We've got a name." Within hours, a new search warrant was issued for the Carter property, this time for any trace linked to Abigail. The excavation team combed through the old garden again, the one Ray had tended for years, the one that had hidden Emily's remains. Every inch of soil turned, sifted, bagged. Nothing. Until a detective shouted from the edge of the yard. Buried beneath the roots of an apple tree, they found a rusted tin box. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were letters, love notes written by Margaret to Ray. Lines scrawled in looping childish handwriting that grew darker with every page. "You said she'd stay quiet. You promised me she wouldn't tell. We belong to each other now." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just complicity, it was obsession. Margaret hadn't simply helped him hide bodies. She had encouraged him, pushed him, controlled him. When she entered the interrogation room that afternoon, Margaret sat waiting, hands folded neatly, a faint smile on her face. "You found the letters," she said before Sarah could speak. "Tell me about Abigail," Sarah said, voice flat. Margaret's eyes gleamed. "Sweet girl. She used to babysit for a friend of mine. She looked at Ray the wrong way once. He told me. I told him to fix it." Sarah leaned forward. "You told him to kill her." Margaret didn't blink. "I told him to make it stop." The words crawled under Sarah's skin. Why her? Why any of them? Margaret's voice softened. "Because they reminded me of what I wasn't. Young, beautiful, free. Ray looked at them the way he used to look at me. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't lose him again." Sarah stared at her. This woman who spoke of murder like memory, who confessed like prayer. "You buried them together. You made a garden out of their graves." Margaret smiled faintly. "We all plant what we can live with." The interview ended when Margaret began humming softly a lullaby that Sarah didn't recognize but that made the room feel colder. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the sound. It followed her home, lingered in the static of the television, the hum of the fridge, the rhythm of the rain. She poured herself a drink, stared at the Polaroid again. The two girls' smiles felt different now, not innocence, but warning. Her phone buzzed. It was a call from the prison warden. "Detective, I thought you should know. We reviewed Carter's belongings after his death. There was something in his cell." "What kind of something?" "A note. Just one line. She'll finish what I started." The glass slipped from Sarah's hand and shattered. She drove to the penitentiary before dawn. The warden met her in his office, slid a small plastic bag across the desk. Inside was a crumpled scrap of paper, written in Ray's unmistakable block letters. "She'll finish what I started." Sarah's thoughts spiraled. Margaret was already in custody, unless he hadn't meant her, unless there was someone else. She pulled every visitor log from the prison's archive, only a handful of names, Sarah herself, the DA, a chaplain, and one woman listed under a different last name, Helen M. Carter. Sarah frowned. Who's Helen Carter? The warden checked the log. She said she was his sister, visited 3 times last year. But Ray never had a sister, not on record. Sarah traced the visitor's driver's license number. The photo that came back made her blood run cold. It was a younger woman, blonde, mid-30s, with the same pale eyes as Margaret, same tilt of the chin, same faint scar on the neck. Margaret's daughter. She'd been a child when Emily disappeared. The daughter no one talked about. The one who'd left town after her father's arrest and was presumed estranged. Now she was back using a new name, visiting her father in secret. Sarah slammed her laptop shut and grabbed her keys. She drove to the county detention center, her heart hammering. When she entered the interview room, Margaret was waiting calm, almost serene. "You never told me you had a daughter?" Sarah said. Margaret smiled faintly. "You never asked. She visited your husband in prison." "Yes," Margaret whispered. "I told her to." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Why?" Margaret looked up, her gaze sharp as glass. "Because someone has to carry the truth. You can bury bodies, detective, but not blood." Sarah's voice cracked. "What did you tell her?" Margaret leaned forward, her whisper colder than the rain. "Everything." The silence that followed was unbearable. Margaret sat back, hands folded, a small smile curling at her lips. She always admired her father. I suppose she got that from me. Sarah felt the room tilt. Where is she now? Margaret didn't answer, just hummed that same lullaby again, slow and soft. Sarah left the room shaking. She called the warden, the state police, every nearby department. But Helen Carter, if that was even her real name, was already gone. Her car abandoned outside town, plates removed, no trace of her in any motel, any surveillance footage, any bank transaction. It was as if she'd dissolved into air. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Sarah's office. Same typewriter, same misaligned E, same faint floral perfume. Inside was a single line, "He promised me to." The letter was signed with an initial H. Sarah stared at it for a long time, the room silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Every instinct screamed that the story was repeating itself, that history wasn't done consuming its own. She looked out the window. Rain again, endless, familiar, almost rhythmic. The same rain that had fallen when Emily vanished, when Ray confessed, when Margaret broke, when every truth came to the surface only to sink again. The file on her desk was labeled "Carter Case Closed." She crossed out the last word and wrote in black ink, "Unfinished." Because monsters don't die. They inherit. And somewhere out there, beyond the pines and the rivers and the fog, a woman with pale eyes and a typewriter was still writing letters, waiting for her turn to be found. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, wrapped in a plain white envelope, no return address. Sarah Holden knew the smell before she opened it, lavender and something older, something like decay. The same perfume, the same paper, the same typewriter with that faintly crooked E. Inside a single line, "You're looking the wrong way." Below it, a Polaroid photograph. A woman standing at the edge of a lake, back turned, hair loose in the wind. The caption read, "Stillwater 3 days ago." Sarah's pulse quickened. Helen Carter, she was alive, and she was watching. The Bureau wanted her off the case. Officially, the Carter file was closed, all charges finalized, all evidence archived. But Sarah couldn't let it go. The photo wasn't just a message, it was a challenge, a taunt, a ghost waving from the water. That night, she reopened everything. Boxes stacked floor to ceiling in her apartment, photographs, transcripts, autopsy reports, every scrap of the past 27 years spread like an autopsy of memory. She pinned the new photo beside the others, connecting them with red string, tracing the pattern she could feel, but couldn't yet name. 3 victims, 2 killers, 1 missing heir to the darkness. At midnight, her phone buzzed a restricted number. When she answered, there was silence. Then a voice, calm, soft, unmistakably female. "You found my mother," the voice said. "Now find me." Click. No traceable number, no recording clear enough for ID. But the tone, it was confident, almost playful. The next morning, Sarah drove north, back to Montana, back to Stillwater, the town that had given up Margaret Carter's ghost. The lake from the photo was there, nestled between pines and fog, its surface perfectly still, too still. Locals said it was bottomless, an old quarry that had filled with rainwater decades ago, the kind of place that swallowed things and never gave them back. She parked by the shore. The wind was cold, sharp enough to sting her face. Something about the stillness made her skin crawl. Then she saw it, a small shape floating near the reeds. A box. She waded in, boots sinking into mud pulled it free. Inside, another photograph wrapped in plastic to keep it dry. This one was older, sun-bleached. A girl, maybe 12, standing beside a car. The license plate was Oregon. The date scribbled in the corner, June 1994. In the background stood a man, Ray Carter, smiling. Sarah drove straight to the Stillwater Police Department. The sheriff there, a weary man named Keller, frowned when she laid the photo on his desk. "Never seen her," he said. "But that lake locals say people dump things there. Cars, trash, bodies maybe. It's deep." Sarah nodded. "I'll need divers." "On whose authority?" he asked. "Mine," she said simply. By dawn, a dive team was in the water. The lake's surface broke in slow ripples as they disappeared below. Minutes stretched. Then a radio crackled static, then a voice, "We've got something." When the divers resurfaced, they brought a car with them. Corroded roof collapsed, license plate barely readable, but under the grime, Sarah could see it, Oregon plates, registered to the Carters. Inside, under the sludge and darkness, were the remains of a small skeleton still strapped in the passenger seat. A girl, no older than 12. The ME's report came back that evening. Cause of death, blunt force trauma post-mortem submersion. Estimated year 1994, DNA pending. Sarah sat in her motel room, staring at the mirror, her reflection split by a crack in the glass. She whispered the same words over and over. "Who are you?" When the DNA results came, they hit like a thunderclap. Helen M. Carter confirmed biological match to remains. Sarah froze. "That's impossible," she said. But science didn't lie. Helen Carter, the daughter who'd visited her father in prison, the woman who'd been sending letters taunting Sarah, had died more than 30 years ago. So who the hell was she talking to? She went back through every trace, visitor logs, surveillance footage, the letters. The woman calling herself Helen had used a driver's license that matched the deceased child's name, but the photo didn't match the age. The ID was forged. Professionally done. The signature on the forms matched Margaret's handwriting. Sarah's stomach turned. Margaret had known exactly what she was doing. She hadn't just confessed. She'd orchestrated the next act. She rushed to the county jail. "I need to see her," she told the deputy. "Can't," he said quietly. "Margaret Carter's dead." Sarah blinked when, this morning, heart failure, found in her cell. The words hit like static. She staggered back against the wall. Heart failure, just like Ray. 2 deaths, weeks apart. Both quiet, clean, almost convenient. She demanded the body. She demanded an autopsy. But deep down, she already knew Margaret hadn't died of a broken heart. She'd been silenced. That night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment files scattered around her, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The lavender smell hit her again, faint, impossible. She turned. On her kitchen table lay a single new envelope. No stamp, no address, just her name. Inside, another Polaroid. The same lake, the same figure standing at the edge, this time closer. The face barely visible through the haze. Blonde hair, blue eyes, smiling. On the back, a message, "She wasn't my mother, but I am her promise." Sarah's hands trembled. Someone had broken into her home. Someone who knew the story better than she did. She checked her security cameras. Nothing. Static. The footage for the last 6 hours corrupted. She called the station. "This isn't over," she told the sheriff. "There's someone else. Someone keeping it alive." The words sounded insane even to her own ears, but she didn't care, because the letters kept coming and the bodies kept answering. She pulled the records again. Margaret and Ray had a child. That much was fact. Helen. But adoption papers showed a second name hidden in sealed records, infant female unclaimed 1989, fostered under state protection. No follow-up, no trace. Sarah's fingers tightened on the page. A second daughter, one they'd never talked about, one who could have grown up anywhere, learned everything from the shadows of her parents' crimes. The next morning, Sarah drove back to Pine Hollow. The town hadn't changed, the same streets, the same rusted signs, the same ghosts waiting behind every fence. She parked near the old Carter house now, an empty shell windows, boarded grass overgrown. The front door hung open slightly, swaying in the wind. Inside, the air was cold, stale, untouched for years. She moved through each room, slowly, flashlight, slicing through the dark. Then she saw it, a single chair in the center of the living room, facing the wall. On the wall, written in faded red paint, were the words she learned from the best. A sound creaked behind her. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Sarah turned and saw a figure in the doorway. A woman, maybe mid-30s, blonde, eyes like frost, calm, almost tender. "You found me," the woman said. Sarah's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The woman smiled faintly. "You already know. You've been chasing me since before you were born." Sarah raised her gun, voice shaking. "Hands where I can see them!" The woman didn't move. "You think I'm my parents' monster, but they were amateurs. They killed because they had to. I kill because I can." Her voice was soft, unhurried. There was no madness in it, just conviction. Sarah stepped closer. "Put the weapon down." "I didn't bring one," the woman said. "You did." And then, as fast as a whisper, she moved not toward Sarah, but toward the window. Glass shattered. The night swallowed her. By the time Sarah reached the porch, the woman was gone, vanished into the woods that had hidden everything for nearly 3 decades. The search lasted all night. Bloodhounds, drones, spotlights cutting through fog, nothing, no footprints, no tracks, just rain washing everything clean. When dawn came, Sarah stood at the edge of the forest, soaked, exhausted, and afraid to admit the truth aloud. Some stories don't end, they evolve. The sins of one generation shape the next. And now, somewhere out there, the last, Carter was free and watching. That night, back in her car, she opened her glove compartment. Another envelope waited there. She hadn't seen it before. No stamp, no name. Inside, a single Polaroid, herself, taken through her office window. On the back 4 words, "Your turn to run." The photo slipped from her hands. The rain hit harder. The engine started on its own hum. Outside, through the blur of storm and glass, a shadow stood at the edge of the parking lot, still, patient, familiar. Sarah closed her eyes. The voiceover would fade with the sound of rain of breath of inevitability. Because in Pine Hollow, ghosts don't stay buried. They write back. The photograph haunted her, her own face framed by her office window, lit by the sterile glow of her desk lamp, taken from outside through glass. The timestamp, printed in the corner, showed 2:14 a.m. a time when Sarah Holden had been inside alone, writing the report she never finished. That meant whoever took it had been watching, close enough to breathe the same air, quiet enough to vanish when she turned her head. Sleep was no longer an option. Every sound carried weight, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old pipes, the whisper of footsteps that never seemed to belong to her. She changed the locks, installed cameras, checked every feed twice. Still, every morning she woke to the same thing, a sense that someone had been there and chosen not to hurt her. Not yet. She showed the photo to the sheriff, to the bureau, to anyone who would listen. They called it obsession. They said she was projecting, exhausted, overworked. The Carter case is over, they told her. Move on. But she couldn't. Because monsters don't end with a conviction. They linger. They adapt. On her desk lay the last letter, the one that read, "Your turn to run." She studied the typeface again, the smudged E, the faint ribbon bleed. She'd memorized every flaw, every imperfection, yet something new stood out this time. A tiny watermark visible only when the paper caught the light, the insignia of a small print shop in Stillwater. That was her way in. By dusk, she was back on the highway, the Oregon rain stretching endless before her. The mountains rose black against a bruised sky. She drove without music headlights, carving tunnels through the fog. Every mile drew her closer to the town that refused to let her go. The print shop sat on Main Street. One room, faded red bricks, a sign that read LeMay Press, family owned since 1965. Inside, the air smelled of ink and dust. An old man stood behind the counter, hands stained with toner. "Detective Holden," he said, surprising her. "I wondered when you'd come." Her breath caught. "You know me." He nodded. "You've been on the news for years. The Carter story. Tragic business. She laid the letter on the counter. "Do you recognize this paper?" He lifted it gently like it might crumble. "Our watermark. Limited run 20 reams total, sold maybe 6 months ago." "To whom?" He turned the ledger around. A name written in perfect cursive, H. Lane, cash purchase, no address. Lane, Sarah whispered. As in Margaret's alias, Stillwater, it's her. The old man hesitated. "Maybe. Or someone who wanted you to think it was." She left the shop with the wind at her back and unease in her chest. Across the street, a figure watched from the alley, tall, still, almost blending into shadow. Sarah turned, but by the time she reached the corner, the alley was empty. Only footprints in the mud leading toward the lake. She followed them. The lake was quieter now. Mirror still, the sky reflected in its surface like a bruise. Sarah stood at the water's edge, flashlight sweeping the reeds. Something metallic caught the beam, a chain half buried. She crouched, brushed away the mud. A necklace. The pendant, shaped like a key. She recognized it instantly. It had belonged to Emily Larson. Her stomach twisted. Someone had returned to the crime scene. Someone wanted her to find this. Back at the motel, she spread the evidence on the bed, the letters, the Polaroids, the necklace. A pattern was forming, a conversation told through artifacts. Each letter led her somewhere new. Each photograph showed what she wasn't supposed to see. It was choreography, and she was dancing to someone else's rhythm. She opened her laptop, replayed the footage from her car's dashcam the night she'd chased the woman at the Carter house. For weeks, she'd believed she'd lost her. But now, in one frame, a reflection glinted in the mirror. Another figure standing across the street recording on a phone. A second watcher. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. "You're getting closer." Her pulse spiked. She typed back before thinking, "Who are you?" 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then another message. "Don't you remember me?" The room seemed to tilt. She scrolled through old case photos, her own archived reports. The girl in the Polaroid, Abigail Dunn, her birth record listed one next of kin, a younger sister placed in foster care after her disappearance. The name had been redacted in the file sealed by court order. Sarah's mind raced. The dates lined up, the ages lined up, the locations lined up. Helen Carter wasn't Ray and Margaret's daughter. She was Abigail Dunn's sister, the sister of one of their victims. This wasn't inheritance, it was revenge. She picked up the phone, dialing every contact she had left in law enforcement. No one answered. The lines were jammed, rerouted. She tried again. Nothing. The storm outside had cut power across the region. Lightning flashed. The room went dark. In the glow of her flashlight, she saw it, a shadow by the window. Tall, motionless, watching. Her gun was already in her hand when the glass shattered. The figure moved fast, too fast, grabbing her wrist, slamming the weapon to the floor. A woman's voice, calm, close. "Easy, detective. You've been chasing ghosts for too long." Sarah swung the flashlight up. The beam hit her attacker's face. Blonde hair matted from rain-blue eyes that burned like ice. "Why me?" Sarah demanded, breath ragged. Helen smiled. "Because you cared enough to see. And because you don't know what side you're on anymore. What do you want?" "Balance." Her grip tightened around Sarah's wrist. "You think you're different from them, don't you? But you and I, we do the same thing. We dig up the dead. We bring them back to life for the world to watch. You call it justice. I call it resurrection." Sarah broke free, stumbled back, reached for the gun. "You killed them. You killed Ray. You killed Margaret." Helen tilted her head. "They were already dead. I just helped their stories end." The sirens came faintly in the distance, police responding to the break-in alarm she'd tripped when the window shattered. Helen stepped back toward the open frame, rain cutting silver lines across her face. Next time, she whispered, "Don't follow the letters, follow yourself." Then she was gone. The night swallowed her whole. When the officers arrived minutes later, they found Sarah standing amid broken glass, trembling blood at her temple weapon on the floor, no footprints, no tire tracks, no trace of anyone else. They called it shock. They called it exhaustion. They told her she needed rest, but Sarah knew what she'd seen. The next morning, she reviewed the motel's surveillance footage. The hallway camera caught the break-in, her door opening, light flickering, her shadow moving inside. But there was no second figure, no intruder, no one at all. Only her reflection in the shattered window. For the first time in her career, Sarah doubted herself. Doubt bled into fear. Fear turned into obsession. She replayed the footage again and again until the lines blurred and the woman she'd sworn she saw began to look too much like her own reflection. Days passed without sleep. Letters stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. Silence grew heavy again, like fog thickening over a graveyard. Then one night a package arrived, small, wrapped in plain brown paper, inside a cassette tape, handwritten label for Sarah. She slid it into her recorder. Static, then a voice familiar, quiet, unmistakable. Margaret Carter. If you're hearing this, the tape began, then The Last of Us is already gone, but you need to understand. There was never just one Helen. Never one daughter. There were many. Girls taken, raised, shaped until they believed they belonged to us. To the story. To the name. He taught them how to disappear. I taught them how to survive. And now they teach themselves. Static swallowed the rest. Sarah sat frozen. The hum of the tape player filling the room. The realization crept in like cold water. This wasn't about one killer, one family, one town. It was a lineage, a contagion. The final line on the tape played faint and warped, almost lost in the noise. You can't solve a story that's still being written. The tape clicked off. Sarah stared at the machine, then at her reflection in the window. The same pale eyes staring back through the rain. For the first time, she wondered if the case had stopped being about the Carters at all. Maybe Helen hadn't broken in to threaten her. Maybe she'd come to recruit her. Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, a siren wailed once and faded. Then silence. Always silence. And as the screen faded to black, the narrator's voice would lower almost a whisper. In Oregon, the rain never really ends. It only waits for someone new to disappear. The tape didn't end when it clicked off. It kept spinning empty. The reel turning in the silence like a pulse that refused to die. Sarah Holden sat in the dark, listening to nothing, waiting for something. Another voice. Another secret. But there was only the hum of the machine and the rain outside. She pressed stop, then rewind. The tape whined backwards, spooling up every word again. She played it once more slower this time, catching what she'd missed before faint sounds under Margaret's voice, breathing, whispering. A second voice, almost overlapping hers, repeating the same words half a second later. You can't solve a story that's still being written. Two voices, not one. Sarah leaned closer to the speaker. It wasn't an echo. It was someone else, someone repeating the line like a child copying a mother's words. The hair on her arms rose. She transferred the audio to her laptop, ran a spectrogram, 2 frequencies, 2 speakers. One was Margaret. The other, female, younger, higher pitch. She played it again, volume up. And in that moment, she realized something else. The younger voice wasn't behind Margaret. It was in front of her. The recording wasn't made before Margaret's death. It was made during. The realization sliced through the air like lightning. Someone had been there in the cell when Margaret died. Someone had recorded her final words. Someone who wanted Sarah to hear them. She grabbed her coat, her gun, the tape, and drove. The rain followed her relentless drumming on the windshield as the miles blurred. She didn't call for backup. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. There was no one left to trust. She drove until the signal died and the road turned to gravel. The trees grew taller, thicker, swallowing the light. The GPS blinked out, then froze. Ahead through the fog, a faint glow. A cabin. She knew that place. It was on no map, but she'd seen it once years ago in the photos from the Carter archives. The Carters' first home long before Pine Hollow. The windows flickered with candlelight. Her headlights cut across the porch and stopped on a figure standing there. A woman motionless, wearing a black raincoat. Sarah stepped out, weapon drawn. Helen. No answer. She moved closer, boots sinking into wet soil. The smell of pine and decay thickened the air. You sent the tape, she said. You've been following me. Why? The woman tilted her head. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat, Sarah saw her face, not Helen's. Someone else. Someone younger. She looked like a ghost wearing someone else's memory. The woman spoke. You shouldn't have come here. Her voice was soft, trembling, but not afraid. They wanted to tell their story, she said. I'm just finishing it. Sarah stepped closer. Who are you? The woman smiled faintly. It doesn't matter what you call me. You've read the files, you know the numbers. Every case leaves someone behind. Every ghost needs a body. The candlelight flickered inside the cabin. Dozens of Polaroids covered the walls, faces, names, dates, some missing, some dead. And among them, Sarah's, her own photograph pinned at the center. Her breath caught. "You've been watching me." The woman nodded. "You're part of it now. Don't you feel it?" The story needed someone new to keep it alive. Sarah raised her weapon, step away from the door, but the woman didn't move. "They never killed for pleasure," she said. "They killed for permanence. You, of all people, should understand that. You chase death because it listens better than the living." "Get down!" Sarah shouted. The woman smiled again. "You think you're the one hunting me. You've never realized you're exactly where I wanted you." She dropped something at her feet, a small black device. The red light blinked once. Sarah dove behind the truck as the explosion ripped through the cabin. Fire erupted, swallowing the walls, shattering glass, throwing debris into the rain-soaked air. The shockwave threw her backward pain, tearing through her shoulder. She hit the ground, hard ears ringing. When she looked up, the cabin was gone, engulfed in flame, a column of black smoke twisting into the night. The figure was gone too. Sirens in the distance, faint but approaching. She lay there, rain mixing with ash, staring at the fire until it blurred. Later, when the fire crews arrived, there was nothing left to find. No body, no trace, just the remains of hundreds of Polaroids curling into ash. Only one survived half-burned. Sarah's face smiling faintly under the word written in ink across the bottom next. At the hospital, they called her lucky. The blast had thrown her clear. Concussion, bruised ribs, burns on her arm, but alive. The FBI took over the scene, treating it as an attempted homicide. Sarah gave her statement, calm, precise, mechanical. They nodded politely, but didn't believe her. There was no proof anyone else had been there. No prints, no witness, no camera footage. When they left, she sat alone in the hospital bed, staring at the half-burned Polaroid on her tray. A nurse entered quietly. "You have a visitor." Sarah frowned. "Who?" The nurse smiled. "Your sister." Sarah froze. "I don't have a sister." But before she could answer, the nurse was gone, and in her place, standing at the doorway, was the woman from the cabin. Clean, dry, dressed in hospital scrubs, her blonde hair tied back, a name tag that read Helen Monroe Behavioral Unit. Sarah's voice cracked. "How?" Helen smiled, that same calm smile. "I told you, you're part of it now." Then she stepped back into the hallway and disappeared among the nurses. Sarah ripped the IV from her arm, stumbled out of bed down the hall, but the corridors were empty. No trace of Helen. No one had seen her. Security reviewed the footage, no entry, no exit, no visitor. By morning, Sarah was discharged. She drove home in silence, exhaustion blurring her thoughts. Her apartment door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of lavender. On her table lay a new cassette. Label, final chapter. Her hands shook as she pressed play. Margaret's voice again. Or maybe Helen's. The line between them blurred now, indistinguishable. "You thought you were chasing us," the voice said, "but we were writing you. Every question you asked, every grave you opened it was the ink. And now the story knows your name." Sarah's throat tightened. She reached for the stop button, but the tape kept spinning. "You'll try to end it," the voice said, "but endings are for the dead." Then static, and beneath it, faintly, the sound of someone humming. The same lullaby Margaret had hummed in the interrogation room. Sarah stood there, frozen. The room felt smaller, darker. The tape clicked off. She looked toward the window. In the reflection, she saw herself, pale, tired, hollow-eyed. And behind her, just over her shoulder, a second reflection. A figure, standing perfectly still. She turned fast, gun drawn. Nothing. Only the lavender scent fading. That night, she packed her things, left the city, drove north without destination headlights cutting through endless rain. She didn't know if she was chasing someone or running from them. Maybe both. As dawn broke, she pulled over at a rest stop off the highway. The fog rolled low across the asphalt. She opened her glove compartment and froze. Another envelope. Inside a single Polaroid. A woman driving, face half lit by dashboard light. It was her. On the back, the words, "You're telling it now." Sarah closed her eyes. The engine idled. Somewhere a storm gathered over the mountains, dark and electric. And as the camera would fade out, windshield streaked with rain wipers cutting through the blur, the voiceover would drop to a whisper. You can run from the truth, but not from the story. Because once you speak its name, it remembers yours. The file landed on his desk with no name on the folder, just a faint lavender scent that didn't belong in a police archive. Detective Elias Ward didn't know why the chief wanted him to see it. Old homicide, the man had said. Unsolved. You like ghosts. Inside were photos so old they looked sepia. In the dim light, burned Polaroids, the wreckage of a cabin, a woman's face half blurred by smoke. The final report ended abruptly. Detective Sarah Holden, status missing. That word clung to him. Missing. Not dead, not retired, just gone. The last line of the report was a note in her handwriting. You can't solve a story that's still being written. Ward leaned back, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Outside, Oregon rain tapped against the glass like fingertips. He'd been a rookie when the Carter case broke. He still remembered the headlines, the horror, the interviews that turned a small-town detective into a household name. Then she vanished. He should have filed the folder back and walked away. Instead, he lit a cigarette he wasn't supposed to smoke indoors and read every page twice. At the bottom of the stack was a cassette tape unlabeled. He found an old player, pressed play. Static, then breathing. A woman's voice Sarah's recorded years earlier. If anyone hears this, she said, don't look for me. The story isn't finished. It moves from hand to hand. It writes itself. Her tone wavered, then steadied. If you smell lavender leaf, if you see the Polaroid flash run, the tape clicked off. That night, Ward dreamed of rain and flickering light. When he woke, the lavender smell was still there, faint but real. On his kitchen table lay a single envelope soaked through at the edges. No stamp, no address, just his name. Inside, a Polaroid. A woman in the driver's seat of a car face, hidden in shadow eyes, glinting in the mirror. On the back, 4 words in looping script. Find her, finish it. Ward drove to Pine Hollow the next morning. 27 years had eroded most of it. Half the storefronts boarded the diner, reduced to a skeleton of metal and weeds. Locals still remembered the Carters, though. Everyone did. He started with the house. Overgrown yard-rotting fence, the faint outline of a for sale sign leaning in the mud. The boards across the windows had been pried loose recently. Inside dust coated everything. But someone had been their footprints in the ash, small, deliberate. On the living room wall, words carved into the plaster, she's in the water. He walked to the backyard. The rain hadn't stopped. The ground was soft slick. He saw it, then a trail of something metallic, half buried under the apple tree. A chain. A key-shaped pendant. He'd seen the photos from the evidence box. It was the same necklace found years ago, thought destroyed in the explosion. Someone had dug it up again. Ward drove to the county morgue. The coroner, an old colleague of Sarah's, looked like she hadn't slept since the 90s. You're too young to remember, she said. She used to come here at night just to sit with the cold cases. Said the dead talk louder after midnight. He showed her the Polaroid. The coroner frowned. You know who took that? No. She used to carry a camera just like it. Said film remembers what we forget. Ward felt the chill crawl down his spine. You think she left this for me? The coroner didn't answer. That evening, he checked into the only motel still open on the edge of town. Room 7 smelled of damp carpet and cleaner. On the nightstand lay a guest book, pages yellow and curling. Between the faded names and dates, one stood out in neat cursive, Sarah Holden May, 14th, 2023. The signature was fresh. He closed the book, heartbeat drumming in his ears. At 2 a.m., the phone in his room rang once, then again. When he answered, there was only static. Then a voice, barely a whisper. Room 11. He grabbed his gun and stepped into the hallway. The air smelled of rain and lavender. Room 11's door was ajar. Inside, darkness. He flicked the switch. Nothing. The power had cut. His flashlight beam shook across the room, empty bed-cracked mirror curtains swaying in the draft. Then on the wall above the headboard, he saw it. A photograph taped there. Sarah Holden standing by a lake, her eyes open, her expression serene. Underneath, written in black marker, I told you not to look. He backed out slowly, heart pounding. From somewhere down the corridor came the faint click of a Polaroid camera. Flash. He turned, gun raised. Nothing but darkness. Flash again, closer. "Show yourself," he shouted. No reply. Only the low hum of the motel sign buzzing outside the window. He fired once into the air, the echo rolling through the hall. Silence swallowed it whole. When he returned to his room, another envelope waited on the bed. Inside the photo, just taken him in the hallway, gun raised, mouth open, mid-shout. On the back, "Now you see her." He left the motel before dawn, adrenaline masking exhaustion. The town's gas station clerk stared as he paid. "You look like you saw a ghost," the man said. Ward didn't answer. Back in Portland, he filed a request to reopen the Carter investigation under the heading Holden Disappearance. Bureaucracy stalled him for weeks. Evidence, misplaced files, sealed voices whispering that he was chasing a myth. Then came the package, mailed from Montana, no return address. Inside one VHS tape unmarked. He borrowed an old player from evidence storage, dimmed the lights, pressed play. The footage was grainy. A room lit by candlelight. Sarah Holden sitting at a table camera aimed straight at her face. Her eyes looked tired but calm. "If you're watching this," she said, "it means the story found you too." Behind her, a shadow moved. Another figure stepped into frame, a woman blonde expression unreadable. Helen. Sarah's voice lowered. "There's no end, just inheritance." The screen went black, then static, then a final frame, Ward's name typed across the bottom. He sat frozen, the tape whirring softly. Outside, thunder cracked over the city. He tried to trace the postmark, but the tracking code led nowhere. Every clue fed into fog. The more he searched, the more it felt like Sarah had built a maze for him to enter, not to escape. A week later, his office filled with the smell again. Lavender. Sweet, heavy choking. He looked up. A Polaroid lay on his desk, still warm from development. It showed the inside of his apartment. The shot was taken from the closet angled toward the bed where he slept. He didn't remember taking it. He didn't remember leaving the camera there at all. He called forensics, demanded fingerprints. The report came back the next day. Only one set. His. He didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove north again, chasing roads that curved through fog and memory. The rain grew heavier until the wipers couldn't keep up. When he finally pulled over, he realized where he was. Stillwater Lake, the same place where Sarah vanished. The shoreline was quiet. Mist rolled across the water like breath. He stepped closer, boots sinking into mud, flashlight trembling in his hand. Something glinted near the reeds. Metal. He reached down and froze. A badge, his badge, the one clipped to his jacket an hour ago. When he looked up, there she was, Sarah Holden, standing at the edge of the water, pale in the moonlight, hair plastered to her face. She didn't speak. "Sarah," he whispered. "What is this?" She smiled faintly. "It doesn't end, detective. It just changes narrators." And then she stepped backward into the lake. The surface swallowed her without a sound. Ward lunged forward, water up to his knees, flashlight beam slicing through ripples. Nothing. Only darkness. When the search teams arrived hours later, they found no footprints, no sign of struggle. Just his flashlight floating on the water, still lit, pointing toward the depths. The official report would read Detective Elias Ward missing, presumed drowned while investigating reopened cold case. But weeks later, another envelope arrived at headquarters, lavender-scented, inside a Polaroid. A man sitting at a desk, cigarette burning between his fingers, papers spread before him. Elias Ward. On the back, written in looping cursive, "Welcome to the story." The tape opens with static and rain. Then a voice, steady, professional, the kind used in true crime documentaries. "This is Echoes of Pine Hollow, Episode 1, The Missing Detectives." A man clears his throat. "I'm Nathan Reed. I'm a journalist, not a cop. 27 years after the Carter murders, 2 investigators disappeared trying to close a case everyone swore was finished. Today, we're reopening it, not with evidence, but with the story they left behind." The sound fades to the low hum of a reel-to-reel recorder. Paper rustles. Detective Sarah Holden. Detective Elias Ward. Both vanished near Stillwater Lake. Both left behind identical warnings. You can't solve a story that's still being written. The camera in the film version would glide through rain over Oregon pine forests. Gray sky mist coiling between the trees, old houses sagging under moss. The narration continues. When I started researching this, I thought it was about murder. It isn't. It's about inheritance. The Carters, the detectives, the witnesses, every one of them left pieces that fit only if you believe in ghosts. Cut to tape, hiss. Nathan interviews the coroner who handled the original Carter remains. Her voice trembles. She came here once, Detective Holden. Sat right where you're sitting. Said the dead talk after midnight. I didn't believe her. Now I don't come here at night anymore. The recording skips. Another voice, distant, distorted by wind, a fisherman at Stillwater. They say she walks the shore sometimes. Thought I saw her last fall. Blonde hair, long coat, didn't wave back. Nathan's tone tightens. It's impossible, of course, but then the letters began. He drops a bundle on the table, envelopes sealed in plastic, lavender scented, each addressed to his newsroom. Each containing a Polaroid. One shows the inside of a motel hallway. Another, a lake at dawn. The last one shows him sitting at his desk, head bowed over a script that hadn't been written yet. Postmarks, he says, from nowhere. No fingerprints, but all printed on paper with the LeMay Press watermark, same as the originals from 2022. He laughs, but it's thin. I'm supposed to stay objective. That's what they tell you in journalism school. Objectivity doesn't smell like perfume. On-screen newspaper headlines, Flickr family friend, killer dies in prison, detective missing in storm, second investigator disappears. Nathan narrates over them. I followed the trail to Montana to Stillwater. The lake was quiet, same as in the files. The motel still stands barely. The clerk doesn't remember their faces, or pretends not to. He walks the camera through the empty hallway, pointing to a door, room 11. They say you can still hear a camera click at night. He pushes the door open. The room is bare except for a single Polaroid on the floor. He kneels, lifts it toward the lens. It's a picture of him kneeling, lifting the photograph. Infinite reflection receding into nothing. Back in the studio, Nathan exhales. When I got home that night, my computer had a new folder, untitled. Inside audio clips, timestamps matching my field recordings. Only, I never uploaded them. Someone did. Someone who knew where I'd be. He presses play on one clip. A woman's voice whispers through static, "Don't look behind you." He frees his eyes, dart into the edge of frame. Behind him, the studio lights flicker. Cut to black. A title card fades in 48 hours later. Nathan's producer, a woman named Zoe Tran, narrates. We found his car at the edge of Stillwater Lake, engine running, headlights on. His recorder was still rolling. She plays the recovered tape. Rain footsteps, shallow breathing, then Nathan's voice quieter now. She's here. I think I see her. Sarah. It's you, isn't it? You finished it. A splash, then nothing. Zoe's narration overlaps with emergency dispatch audio. Search teams recovered no body, only his microphone washed ashore. The program pauses. Silence stretches long enough for the audience to feel the weight of it. Then Zoe's voice again, slower, deliberate. After Nathan disappeared, the network canceled the series, but the letters kept coming. Every producer received one, every intern, every listener who downloaded the pilot. Same lavender scent, same typewriter font, same message. She unfolds one and reads, "Thank you for listening. Now, it's your story." The screen cuts to static, then a final montage news anchors reporting missing journalists, local footage of police combing the lake candlelight vigils reflecting off the water's surface. Over it, Zoe's closing monologue. Some say the Carters were killers. Others say they were storytellers who found the perfect audience. Maybe Sarah Holden understood that better than anyone. Maybe she followed their path to keep the story alive. Or maybe the story found her first. A beat of silence. Then the faint click of a Polaroid shutter. The last frame appears a still image of the film crew gathered at their editing bay, none of them looking at the camera. The voice returns, uncredited female, calm, familiar. You can't solve a story that's still being written? The credits would roll over slow-motion rain, the lavender perfume drifting through the theater in imagination only. And somewhere beneath the sound of thunder, a whisper you could almost mistake for wind. We're still listening. The rain came again. It always did. In Pine Hollow, seasons didn't change so much as repeat themselves, each one a slightly different echo of the last. The trees still leaned toward the lake, the The streetlights still buzzed against the fog, and the town still carried its silence like a secret. 28 years after Emily Larson vanished, no one used the phrase cold case anymore. It had become folklore. Teachers told their students not to take the back road home. Travelers slowed at the Welcome to Pine Hollow sign without knowing why. And on certain nights when the wind shifted, the smell of lavender drifted across Main Street like a memory that refused to die. A local radio host began his evening program with it, the story of the Carters, of the detectives who disappeared chasing ghosts, of the journalist who followed them into the water. He spoke in that calm tone reserved for bedtime stories, though the audience never slept easily after. It started, he said, with a family friend, and ended with a town that forgot how to breathe. The broadcast reached thousands of listeners, but only one recognized the voice. In a motel outside Portland, a woman sat by the window, headphones on, fingers trembling against a mug of coffee gone cold. The voice on the radio was hers, Sarah Holden's, but she hadn't spoken those words in years. She didn't remember recording them. She didn't remember leaving Pine Hollow at all. She turned the dial higher. "You can run from the truth," the voice said, "but not from the story." The same line that ended Nathan Reed's unfinished documentary. The same words printed on the back of every Polaroid. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across her curtains. She froze. The light lingered a second too long, then disappeared down the road. She unplugged the radio. Silence returned, but not peace. Somewhere in the wall, something ticked a faint, rhythmic click, like a camera shutter. She stood heart racing and followed the sound to the closet. Inside, on the top shelf, sat a box. Brown cardboard sealed with tape, her own handwriting scrawled across the lid. Evidence Holden, Ward. She didn't remember packing it. She opened it anyway. Inside lay a Polaroid camera, a single undeveloped photo, still ejected halfway through the slot as if someone had taken a picture moments before closing the box. She pulled it free. The image came slowly, colors bleeding into shape, her motel room viewed from the doorway. She stared at the picture, then at the door itself. Someone had taken it from inside the room. Sarah's breath caught. She turned, the lock backed away, eyes darting to every corner. The faint perfume of lavender clung to the air. The rain outside intensified, hammering the roof. The radio, though unplugged, crackled once. Then her own voice whispered through the static, "Endings are for the dead." The lights flickered, went out. Darkness pressed close. She could hear it now. Footsteps on wet pavement coming toward her door. She reached for her gun, but her hands shook too badly to hold it steady. The knob turned once, twice, softly, then stopped. Silence. The next flash of lightning revealed the door still closed, her reflection trembling in the window. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember. For a moment she saw another reflection beside her, Elias Ward's face, calm, steady, watching her. Then it was gone. She sank to the floor, the photo still in her hand. The edges had begun to fade, the colors dissolving. Soon there would be nothing left but white. She whispered, half to herself, half to the ghosts she'd spent her life chasing, "It's over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Because stories like this never end, they just find new listeners. 2 weeks later, a maintenance worker discovered the room empty. The window opened, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. On the table sat a cassette tape, its label smudged by rain but still legible, "Final Interview S. Holden." The police archived it with the others, one more unsolved note in a file that no one wanted to touch. But before the tape disappeared into storage, an intern played it once. Static then, Sarah's voice calm, measured, almost peaceful. "They say the Carters built their story to last forever. Maybe they did. Maybe every question keeps it breathing. Maybe every voice keeps it talking. The truth is, we don't need monsters in the woods. We make our own, out of memory, out of fear, out of everything we can't let go." A pause, then softer. "If you're listening, turn off the light." The intern did. Out of reflex, not belief. In the darkness, the tape continued. "You're part of it now." Click. The reel spun until it ran out of tape, the sound fading into the hum of the recorder. Outside, rain began to fall again, washing the dust off the steps of the courthouse, off the gravestones, off the long-forgotten sign that once welcomed strangers to Pine Hollow. The camera of the imagined film would rise slowly through the mist, showing the town from above, small, ordinary, silent. And somewhere beyond the frame, a shutter clicks once, twice, like the heartbeat of something that refuses to die. Then darkness. A single caption fades in. Cold case closed, story continues.